Good morning and welcome to the latest AHDB webinar from the East Midlands. This is the first time we've done this. We brought all the region's monitor farmers together. We haven't done this in any meeting, let alone in a webinar. And in a way, it's a session that will kill 2 or 3 birds with one stone. We can do the regional update. We can look again at soil health, which we've visited a few times with all of the monitor farms. We consider business resilience and so on. So lots going on, and I don't think I'm over-promising really when I say I think it's going to be great. I'll come back shortly to the proper business of the day, but with a few bits and pieces to deal with first, bits of housekeeping. Just before I say this, in the background we've got Christian controlling all things technical. He'll keep an eye on all that. Fiona is also fielding questions, so if you send those over, I'll say something about that in a sec. She'll be there to field them. You are muted. Some of you might be glad to hear that, and you probably, if you've been on lots of these, you'll know that by now. We can't hear you, but you should be able to hear us. If you have any questions, can you do the usual that we do for these things, please, and put them in the chat box, which you should be able to find at the side of your screen. You can just type it in. There are, oh yeah, I should have mentioned this earlier as well. We're due to finish at 12:30, and I think we will be finished by then, but that's sort of where we're scheduled to finish. Next bit is the basis Naroso points, 2 basis points and 1 Naroso points for this. If you want your points and you haven't already registered for them, make sure you put your details, that's your name, your postcode and your date of birth, put them in the chat box please, so that that can be recorded on your behalf. The webinar will be recorded so that you can catch it afterwards, and ideal if you need to leave early or anything like that. If you have any feedback on the webinar, please could you let us know. It helps us to inform making webinars better or more appropriate going forward. And those are the AHDB social media details at the bottom of the screen. And on then, in that case, to the main business of the day, to our speakers who are all lined up at the top. I think you'll know by now who they all are. Can I ask you just to identify yourselves? We've got, first of all, Colin Chappell, retiring Brig Monitor farmer. When I say that, I don't mean he's retiring as such. He's having a very long, drawn-out retiring process from the Monitor Farm programme because he should have finished last summer, but we still haven't completely finished things off. I'm happy to say in many ways he's able to join us today, so that's great. We've then got Rick Davis, Northampton Monitor farmer. This is alphabetical, but it's also in the order in which they joined the programme, which is pretty appropriate, really. We've also got father and son team, James and Michael Parker from the Vale of Beaver Monitor Farm. Mike's there, James is joining shortly. And then we've also got our most recent monitor farmer in the East Midlands, Gary Willoughby.
Morning all.
He's sort of like, Gary's a bit like Colin in reverse. He's having a very long, drawn-out launching process. So, a challenge for everybody. And anyway, it's great to have everybody on board, full stop, and also for this morning. They had quite a challenge for this. The task they had was to do this, cover all the soil improvement stuff they've done in 10 minutes. And that was quite a task. I realised with hindsight it was almost unfair, but I think that they've picked out the choicest bits for us this morning. Anyway, it's a marvellous opportunity for you to grill them, find out what they have been up to. I'm very grateful to them all for the effort they've put in and the time. They all agreed without hesitation to do this. And I hope, and I'm pretty sure you will, all of you. I think that you at home and all of our panel of speakers should get loads out of this. Let's make sure that you do. On that note, I think we're ready to move on almost. Just one thing before we start. One of our speakers, in fact, suggested a question he'd like to ask everybody at home before we start. Are you currently reading independent information about soils, as in non-commercial information? Are you currently reading independent information about soils? If you could answer that for us, please. Yes or no? That'll be something we might want to revisit later on in the session. 10 seconds for that.
Seconds, yeah.
All righto, we've got a lot of interested people in soil already, which I suppose is what you'd expect in a way. But anyway, that's still interesting. I think a quarter of people on the call are not. Okay, interesting to see whether today makes any difference, if any. I think at this point then we're ready to hand over to Colin Chapel at Midlands Monitor Farm. Thank you, Colin.
Well, good morning, welcome. If that that slide comes on, this is us. It's actually my mum's drive. Mixture of owned, contract farmed, FBT, ad hoc contracting. And by which I mean I basically do my neighbour's farm or bar cultivations. We're mainly minimum till. We do opportunistic, I would call, direct drilling, oilseed rape, the beans, and we do a lot of we do a bit of preparation in the winter and then direct drill the spring crops. The cropping is wide and diverse. The marrowfat and the binding peas are on 2 different rotations. The binding peas on the lighter land, the marrowfat on heavy land. Miscanthus is on a set block, 26 hectares, on fields we can't do a lot else with, very awkward fields, out of the way fields, fantastic for soil health, Miscanthus, and returns just as much investment on those fields as the rest of the farm. Just ought to mention canary seed, things like canary seed and linseed. Grow them more, not necessarily for the returns you get from them, but linseed, for example, if you've ever had a flowering plant, pulled it out of the ground and had a look at the roots underneath, that's why I grow things like canary seed and linseed. We also have a suckler herd, but in all honesty, the suckler herd doesn't fit with where I'm heading at the moment, and therefore, as much as I hate sheep, we might be going to a sheep flock soon, but they won't be mine, they'll be somebody else's. Next slide, Christian, please. So this is typical of us. Low phosphate, naturally potash releasing soils, sky high magnesiums, organic matters at 11-12%, alkaline soil pHs, microbial activity high, soil health index high, and if you look at the textural classification, it's classified as a silt clay at 50% of clay content. So that's where I'm going to focus on, is the clay content. I think all 4 of us have quite high clay soils. So next slide, please, Christian. So this is where, this is the River Ancombe. We are in North Lincolnshire. The River Ancombe dictates everything I do. What you can't tell from that photograph is the river level is exactly the same height as the surrounding land. Once that water gets above the towpath, which you can't quite see, just at the parapet, at the bottom of the parapets there of the bridge, it doesn't have to come over the banks to flood. The banks weren't designed to hold the water, they leak. And therefore I have a lot of ponding, I have a lot of issues. When this level goes high, we had 17 mils overnight in 2 hours. I got naturally high water levels. But the context of this picture is that building in the background you can see there. That is a water extraction point. They extract water from there to take to a reservoir to settle, to then take to a treatment works, and effectively that water comes back to me in my drinking water. Every single thing I do has a relevance to what I drink. So what I'm putting on the land, what I'm doing with my soils, has a massive relevance. What is slightly unnerving, or was unnerving 25 years ago when I came home, was EA sample from that bridge, Anglian water sample from that bridge. We're taking water samples. They were there this morning sampling after a rainfall event. We need to know what's going on in our soils, and the results are open to everybody, and that's why I have a good relationship now with Anglian Water, and try and contextualize what I'm doing on my soils, because it affects everything I do. Next slide, please, Christian. So 4 years ago, remembering this is 4 years ago, before I was a monitor farmer, on the back of productive harvests, I was feeling on top of the world, I competitively challenged and won for a farm business tenancy, a 6-year contract. From you see from here, similar soils, alkaline, typical FBT land, the phosphate to be mined, magnesium sky high, but the cation exchange capacity, the ability of my soils to give nutrients back to my plants is all there. We'll focus on the high mag levels because that is a consistent of my soils. High mag soils are indicative of soil that can lose structure through waterlogging and can drain very slowly. The higher the magnesium, the tighter the soil. So we took on this block of land. The first thing we did was drainage is absolutely key. You've seen how high level the water levels are. I need to get water away as fast as I can into the ditches. So we drained it, we ditched it, we didn't drain it, sorry, we checked the outfalls and we slapped on phosphate to counter that low phosphate. We're using fiberphos, we're not using triple superphosphate, we're using recyclable sources. We go to the next slide, Christian, because here, so we put on the phosphate and we ploughed it. We took this on in August. It had massive blackgrass problems, typical, drented land. We've got 60% clay as opposed to 50% clay. But the key thing that I'd like to mention is the soil structure, the cultivations here. If you can read that, if you can read it, moving all the soil in the top 20 to 30 centimetres will not help the soil structure in this field due to the inherent high properties of magnesium and calcium. My first problem was I ploughed it. Then we got a wet winter. And my soils, and particularly this block, held more water than everybody else. And this was my light bulb moment. It was me, not necessarily the drainage, it was me. It was what I was doing to my soils that were causing me the issues that were going forward. I had soils here which had outdated drainage. We couldn't use cultivations because we were creating an artificially high air pocket that then as soon as we put cultivations on it, we condensed them and squashed all those air pockets out. We had no earthworms, we had non-recycling nutrients. They were all there, but they weren't. Look at the VES score. It's sort of not good, but not bad. It's in the middle. This was where I had to really take a focus on. I couldn't expect my landlord to redrain the whole blocks. We did targeted bits. He's a very good landlord. He does do targeted bits. But we need to address the magnesium and calcium ratio. I can't decrease the magnesium. In fact, I have to put it on foliar. I've got to increase the calcium. So we started using gypsum, which we've been using for years. But what it became obvious is if I didn't put the cultivations in, I didn't have to take them out. So why put them in the first place? We needed to address this magnesium calcium ratio. We increased the amount of gypsum we put on the soils to stop the magnesium creating the tight soils. Gypsum's put on at 5 to 6 tons per hectare. It's free, but they often have, if you do a big amount, you have to have a deployment and that can cost £2,000 to be rectified by the EA. Application was mine, costs roughly £9.50 a hectare. On top of this, I was trying to get to moving the soils less, but yeah, I was creating problems with the soils. So I was aiming for direct drilling. We tried it on cold turkey. It didn't work. The soil wasn't good enough heart. It wasn't closing the slots around me. So instead of focusing on loads and loads of cultivations, why don't I just focus on drills? So I now have a Vardasat drill with cultivation kit, because that is the cultivation kit I do, with a bio drill on the back that allows me to put small seeds on. I have a tine drill that allows me to create a seed bed without having, because the direct drilling can sometimes create slots, or very often create slots, and the soil wasn't good enough heart. And I have a subsoiler that has a small seeder on it as well. I'm trying to create air pockets, but I'm trying to do it without cultivation. So I'm using cover crops now. Direct drilling on its own didn't work. Cover crops on their own didn't work, but the two in combination, fantastic, really, really good. I'm trying to encourage mycorrhizal fungi to create a soil structure where it's glued together rather than held together by air pockets that can be squeezed. We're adding compost to the soils. That's the first thing when we learned what we were doing. We add compost. It cost me £2.50 a tonne. I often put 25 tonnes per hectare on, plus the application costs, which again are about £9.50. I'm also trying to increase the soil armour on the soil. I'm trying to increase so that the heavy rainfall events, like the 17 mils we had overnight, so the soil, the structure from the soil is there at the top, so it doesn't just immediately float off the top. Because as you've seen, I have issues with Environment Agency checking into it. I believe what I need to go, how do I know I'm making a difference with all this? Well, the soil's percolating better. I've created the soil armour. The water is getting through. It's not ponding on the top. But from here, I need to focus more on the soil fungi. We don't know what we're doing to the soil fungi. We may be becoming more bacterially dominant. We need to increase on this, take an integration on the fungi. We can do tests for that now. Pests and diseases can be indicative of unhealthy, degraded soils like these. Use less insecticides, perhaps. That's what I'm doing on my oilseed rape. I've managed to grow oilseed rape this year without using a single insecticide yet. Fertilizer. If we can get efficiency of fertilizer up to more like 150 kilos, but at 100% efficiency, that's equivalent to where we're going at the moment, 240 kilos of N at 60% efficiency. The healthier soils will, to me, mean lowered cost of production, lower carbon footprint, and a healthier ecosystem. And that's where we utilize less fuel going forward. Next slide, please, Christian. So my life is all about management of soil pores. So we need to structure the water, get rid of the water, manage the soil pores, and at the moment I'm doing it through a combination of roots and metal, aiming to establish a crop as soon as possible after loosening, and therefore to stabilize the soil structure that I'm going for. Next slide, and I'm just about there. Next slide, Judith. Christian, sorry. This, that's how I'm doing it. So that's maize. That is me establishing a maize crop. So I do the cultivation in the autumn, put in mustard there to allow the soil structure to be glued together to direct drill maize into that later on. That's how I'm tackling the maize in my rotation. Next slide, Christian. Very last one. We have a ditch at my dad's farm. When I was a lad, we used to find eels in this ditch. Ever since, for 20 years since, never found anything. We found 11 of these. I think it's brown trout. It could be stone loach, but also there's some bream in there. It's a tiny little ditch. Surely the water course is a better health now because we've got these in it. I think I better shut up and let Rick, who is far more better at this than I am, to move on. Thank you very much.
Colin, thank you, and thank you for keeping to time. We'll at that, I think we'll move on to Rick. Thank you. Here we go.
Morning all. Thank you for that, Colin. It's really interesting to see what other people are doing, and it's quite nice to know we're all on the same kind of path. But anyway, so this is my 10-minute slot to update you where I am, what we're trying to do, and what we're trying to achieve going forward. Next slide, please. So for those of you who don't know me or the farm, we're based on the Buckinghamshire, Bedfordshire, Northampton border. Just under 400 hectares of cropping. As you can see there, we're roughly 1/3 owned and 2/3 on FBT. So we are largely tenant farmers. You can see 2021 harvest. We are heavy on wheat. We have been heavy on wheat since we probably lost oilseed rape 3 years ago. Primarily for lack of a good break crop, which we find provides a good return. We have grown spring barley for the last 7 years. This year, in light of a no-deal Brexit or potential of a no-deal Brexit, I dropped spring barley from the rotation and went for another another slug of second and third wheats. I've been criticised over the years for our addiction to growing wheat. But I'll come to that later on. So you can see we've got some spring beans in the rotation, which we're using on our heavier block towards Bedford. That's a 1 in 4 rotation and has worked really well, giving us some great entry into wheat, and also made a few savings on direct drilling and also some nitrogen applications. We've also got 17 hectares of arable reversion grass on the floodplain, which we currently sell to a local dairy farmer for he has 2 to 3 cuts of silage off that per year, and then the rest we've got 2 mid-tier schemes and then some permanent pasture where I've got my cattle. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick overview of my 8-year average yields. You can see we've had some pretty good years in 14, 15, in 17 and 19. So we've had some good results. And I came home to farm in 2012. Obviously, my first autumn back was was disaster. I think we got 40 hectares of wheat in the ground. And we've seen some pretty good improvements since 2012 using the Claydon drill, moving away from min-till and ploughing. As you can see, 2020 wasn't the best year that we could have had. But if I'm totally honest, the results were far better than we could have ever asked for, given the 8 weeks of drought that we had and some of our light land really suffering. I think I can't quantify it from this slide, but I think looking at the results of our first and second weeks there, or second includes third, fourth and fifth weeks, I think if you could draw a line on the water holding capacity of our soils, from my mind, they have increased significantly over the last 8 years. I don't think we could have achieved an average of 7 tonnes a hectare of second wheats in a year like that back in 2010 or previous. Next slide, please. So this is our system. Like I said, I came home in 2012. We purchased a Claydon drill in 2013. We had a contractor drill some wheat and some rape for us in 2012. As Colin have alluded to, we're doing similar things. We are trying to reduce all surface cultivations where possible. As a minimum, we might just stubble rake once in the summer in dry conditions, or we've got a Claydon terrace style which we'll go through just to get us a light chit, incorporate some chopped straw, and create a bit more tilth on some of the heavier soils. In places this year, I've maybe over cultivated again just once with the terrace style, but sometimes in wetter conditions or damper conditions, on some light land, it can actually over cultivate. So I think looking forward, sometimes I find less is more. So I think going forward, we'll probably end up assessing where we are in certain places, and actually we will probably completely eliminate a cultivation from those places. We chop pretty much 95% of all of our straw. We usually bale some of our floodplain for bedding my cattle on, and that's primarily because if we don't bale it, it will probably wash down the river. Roguing blackgrass, we've been doing that since I came home. We're finding we're getting on top of it now. The only trouble is that we're now selecting for short blackgrass. So obviously it's a visual game, roguing blackgrass, and if you can't see it above the canopy, then generally it gets missed. So those short plants then shed their seed, and we are seeing some more shorter blackgrass within the crop, but largely we are getting on top of it. So that has ramifications going forward for soil health and reducing herbicide usage. So I'd like to think going forward we can reduce that further. We are largely just on pre-em only regarding blackgrass. Might be the odd peri-em or post-em residual where we need it on some dirtier fields, but largely we're not using any Atlantis or any Broadway Star. Well, not selecting for blackgrass anyway. I've got a very small herd of red poll cattle, which I said earlier on our permanent pasture. Using a corral on some hard standing in the winter, which works well, but in a winter as wet as this, it's never the prettiest. So using wood chip around the silage feeders, and then obviously straw as bedding. Going forward, I'd love to be able to integrate them into parts of the arable rotation, whether that be on a 2-year grass lay or growing some kind of cover crops to graze in the early part of the winter. But again, there's food for thought there. With the muck there from the corral, and also some imported horse muck and some waste turf from my brother's business, we're making around about 550 tonnes of compost per year, which we'll come to later. And then we're also using Thames water sewage cake, which we're spreading around about 130 odd hectares annually. Cover cropping we'll come to as well. We're in the early stages of that as well. Next slide, please. This is a soil health review that NIAB Tag did for us last September. It might be quite hard to see for you, for some of you to see this slide. But largely, I chose 7 fields around the farm, which I wanted to target because there's a couple of fields overachieving, lighter land that were often do well in a drought, and also some heavy land which often exceed expectations. And then I've got a poor field there, which is called Cottage Field, which is a field that's been grazed by horses for 20 years, and it's had virtually no input of NP or K since. And I wanted to use this slide to highlight a few things. So obviously, phosphate on this slide is quite there's some variations within there. Tyso Close, which is the field at the top, which has a heavy clay content. Clay content in this field is around about 36 to 37%, which is fairly high for our farm. The organic matter on this field is just shy of 10%, which is fantastic for our area, being largely quite a mineral soil. And it's this field that seems to be overachieving for us. It used to be historically a home field next to a small dairy farm, so it would have been lathered with muck over the years. And I'm sure we've all got one of those fields that seems to do exceedingly well. This field will do in excess of 12, 13 tons year in, year out. Last year just gone, despite the drought, I think it did 12.1. Earthworm numbers in that field are lower than I'd like to see, and that probably goes for all the sites. But I think that comes around in the accounting. Half-worms don't count, and secondly, juveniles don't count. We had a lot of juveniles, which is a good sign of the soils coming into their own. I think there's probably enough. We've probably covered enough on that slide for now. Next slide, please. So my main objectives, not just since I've become a monitor farmer, but I suppose since 2017 when I joined the program, it's made me kind of really focus on soils a bit more, and I suppose maybe look into what we're actually doing. So primarily, I would like to increase organic matter. That's a pretty high objective for me, so I can try and increase water holding capacity. Increase P and K indexes on a tenanted farm we've got of almost 200 hectares. I'll come to later, but we're very low on phosphate, or we have been historically. Increase trace element availability. Increase soil microbial activity, along with increasing mycorrhizal fungi, which I think going forward, as Colin said, is something we don't know enough about, and also is very hard to measure. Cost savings, because as we all know, if we can get our soils really singing, there'll be some significant savings there to be had for all of us. Reducing bagged inputs, N, P, and K. I think I'm on the road to reducing that. But again, it's a lifetime's work. And again, reducing reliance on fungicides, herbicides, and insecticides. But generally, at the bottom, as we all know, it's all about increased net margin and profitability, and that's largely what we're all here for. Next slide, please. As I said, introduced cattle in 2014. It's, from my point of view, it's sort of it's been good to have some livestock back on the farm. I really enjoy the livestock. Makes the most of our permanent pasture, and also allows a bit of muck to come back in as well. So that's been a great positive. Also, I'm boxing the beef, so we've sort of got a box beef scheme which I've been doing now for I think 6 years. That's working really well. Demand at the minute is really high, so I'm really pleased with that. Next slide, please. Oh, there's some pictures missing there, I think. Thank you. So this is showing we've got an old railway line, the Northampton to Bedfordshire railway line, Bedford railway line, and it's a nice bit of hard standing. It doesn't look quite so pretty today with the amount of rain we've had. So generally, we're importing with a horse muck from local horse yards. My cattle muck, when I muck out the corral in March, gets stacked there, and then I will go through. I've got a compost turner, which I think should be on the next picture. Yeah, so I bought this compost turner from a composting business in Peterborough, and for £2,000, probably spent £1,200 doing some work on it, and I've been really pleased with how it how it turns. It's making some nice product, and the analysis there is showing at 15 tonnes per application per hectare. There's some good values of available N, P, and K. Again, magnesium in there and a small amount of sulfur. So it's a nice product, and I'm really pleased with it. It's not the cheapest. Obviously, it's a fairly time-consuming turning with that turner, and also got to windrow it in the first place. But it's more organic matter. It's introducing more biology to the soil. Next slide, please. So that's just my hand with showing the consistency of it. Next slide, please. Again, this is often proved fairly hard to get hold of, and we're very lucky that we live in a highly populated area. Thames Water, we're probably on the northern end of their radar, but this is our third year with Thames Water. We've had 1 year with Anglian Water. So this is coming onto the farm, 23 tonnes a hectare, which is on the high end, I suppose, for sewage cake. But it's costing me £35 per hectare delivered and spread, which for the amount of available phosphate, as you can see there, in year one, just shy of 40 kilos of nitrogen, 140 kilos available phosphate, and then obviously potassium, magnesium, and a good chunk of sulfur. So it's fantastic stuff. The only downside is the compaction with direct drilling. In a wet summer, they can make a mess, but you've got to weigh up the pros and the cons. And we're trying to do this on our main home farm every other year where possible, and on an alternative farm every 3 years. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, cover cropping. We, in the early stages of this, really, probably this is my third autumn. We've had playing around the edges, if you like, trying to establish some cover crops as cheaply as possible. This is a black oat, vetch, and spring barley, pre-spring beans. So we have historically flat lifted before spring beans, primarily because beans are quite lazy rooters, want to try and get some air in the soil, and we found this works really well. So we'll flat lift before spring beans, and then drill this cover crop into the into that subsoil ground as early as possible, probably around about probably 3rd to 4th week of August, depending on combining, and then try and get a decent cover before the spring. Next slide, please. So it's just showing the stand. So this crop is probably in the region of sort of 12 to 14 inches tall, and then we will destroy that cover middle to end of February, and then drill as soon as we can travel with the claydon. Next slide, please. Again, sheep. I'm not the biggest fan of sheep generally, but we've grown stub alternates for 2 years. This year here we had a great experience. It's on some lighter land towards the river. Worked really well. We had a good crop of turnips. Flea beetle hit it pretty hard early on, but I was generally pretty pleased. Grazed down really hard, as you can see on the bottom photo, and provided some good cover there for 275 sheep for 8 weeks, and provided a great opportunity to direct drill straight into that spring barley straight in. We saw some good yields on that year. The second year on some heavier land at the top of the farm wasn't quite so successful. The turnip struggled to establish on the back of a dry summer, and the heavy land on the back of a wet winter last year, although it looked like a nice entry into spring barley, they'd capped it slightly, and it wasn't pretty drilling. So I've learned my lesson. We didn't have any turnips this year, but I would like to use it going forward, potentially on the on some lighter land. Next slide, please. My coffee delivery. So just going forward, I wanted to look at, so next slide please as well, Christian. There's one more, that's it. So So here I wanted just to show you in a very short time scale. Looking back, I wish I'd done some organic matter testing back in 2012, but I didn't. So looking at here, I've got a 3-year lapse from 2016 to 2019. We've now got these areas pinpointed, the GPS, so we can go back and try and revisit that exact same spots. So you can see we are moving in the right direction, coming from a fairly average base, I suppose, 4.3 up to 8.2, and they are moving in the right direction. I mean, they generally say it might take you 2 to 3 years to gain one percentage point. So we're pretty pleased with the progress. Next slide, please. Here, I just wanted to show you quickly. This is the tenanted farm we took on in 2014. So the top map there is 2015, is showing you the phosphate levels for that farm. The 2 outlying fields, 2 outlying blocks you can see to the west. Moving from 2015 to 2020, the 2 outlying blocks to the west were basically have only received bagged phosphate, so DAP and TSP. So that's over a 6-year period. We've managed to increase the indices, I'd say, by around about 1 point, which I'm fairly pleased with. We've been putting slightly over maintenance, so I'm pleased that that's come out in the maps. However, the other 2 blocks there, the central block, which you can see in 2015 was 0 up to maybe 1 minus, the odd field at 2 minus. We've managed to move those blocks to between 3 to 3 plus, and that is with 1 application of sewage sludge. The most easterly block, that was applied in 2018 or autumn of 2018, and the central block was 2019. So I'm really pleased with what we've managed to achieve there. And again, we've got a good dollop going on this year. The two outlying blocks in the west will be receiving it this year, and it just goes to show how available that phosphate is. And you compare the bagged phosphate with the cake, it's incredible really to see that visual. Next slide, please. And just to put that into context, here's our 2015, that would have been our general P&K and magnesium policy. So we were spending in the region of £30,000 on DAP, TSP, MOP and kieserite for rape. And it's quite sobering then to see through variable rate spreading we've reduced our TSP and MOP usage, and also because of the introduction of the sewage cake, we're not, other than very low areas, we're not generally applying any phosphate onto those fields that have received cake in the previous 2 to 3 years. And then also the introduction of the compost in there is providing some other benefits. So we're seeing annual savings of just shy of £20,000 just in bagged P&K. Next slide, please. Just a quick slide. Just want to cover some cover crop costs. I know it's always a contentious issue. Some people just see it as a cost, and it's very hard to quantify the benefits of cover crops. So I just wanted to home save barley and bought in vetch and black oats, around about £24 a hectare. Stubble turnips, again home save or purchase from a neighbour, around about £12 per hectare. And then again home save barley and peas, around about £14. Again, the biggest cost of all these things is the establishment. So drilling, we often put around £50 per hectare for drilling, and then rolling at 17. The only income from a cover crop that you can really quantify is grazing with sheep. So 30 pence per head per week for a sheep generally covers seed and establishment costs, but you're not going to get rich out of it. But again, it's good to recycle the nutrients, and in the right conditions can work really well. Next slide, please. So where do we go now? Going forward, as I said earlier, I want to continue with the sewage cake. It's been a fantastic product for us, and in good years we've seen easily a tonne per hectare uplift in wheat yield. Experimenting with cover crops, I think there's a lot more to do. it's a risk and reward. I think some of these soils really need a cover throughout some of these wet autumns and winters, and I hate seeing bare soil. Summer catch cropping, as you can see in the picture to the right, this is a spring barley and pea cover crop which I put in after wheat, before wheat. Worked really well, but it wouldn't want it to be any wetter, and it's worked currently. I'm very pleased with the results it's had so far. We shall see what the BYDV looks like in the following wheat crop. It received an insecticide towards the end of November, but we shall see what it looks like with the barley being a vector for the aphids host. Sorry. As I said earlier, introducing cattle to the arable rotation would be great if we could going forward, but we'll have to be mindful as to where we do that on the light land. Currently in mid-tier on 2 schemes, and we're looking to renew another one in 2022. Looking at a 2-year legume lay potentially to introduce a legume into some of the lighter land where we don't think it'll support spring beans. And I'm really keen to look at relay or companion cropping. Next slide, please. So in summary, I think what I've learned is that the organic matter isn't the golden egg, but it's just part of the story. I've got some soils with very high organic matter, but it's the phosphate that often lets it down. Overall business resilience is based on good soil health and fertility, I feel. And it's not just the levels of P and K and magnesium, but they need to be available. And sometimes I find that bagged inputs, as much as you might make you feel like you're gaining, when you're looking back at the 2 maps that I showed you earlier, bagged input versus sewage sludge, it's incredible to see the actual difference of available phosphate and potash. Good drainage is also key. I had a drainage contractor here last week to look at potentially draining 80 acres of some of our sandy clay loam, which has sat very wet in the last 4 to 6 weeks. Building soil health is a lifetime's work, and in the meantime we've got to make a profit in order to cash carbon credits into the soil. I think it's very easy to get dragged along on the roller coaster that we've got to put cover crops as and where we can, have a very, very diverse rotation, which I truly believe, and I would really like to have a diverse rotation, but sometimes some of these cover crops just don't cover the costs, and they've got to be a very, very good crop to actually make a profit. And these cover crops need to make a profit, in my opinion. And in these times of extreme weather, looking to increase more resilience to the main system. Thank you very much for listening, and I will pass on. Thank you.
Rick, thank you for that. Plenty of information there, loads in fact. His other job is a photographer. I always think Rick's photographs are amazing. Anyway, on that note, over to James and Michael next. Thank you.
All in all, I'm Michael Parker. This is my dad. Hello. James Parker. We're Sherwood Farms, 3rd year monitor farmers. And yeah, so a quick look at us. This is Sherwood Farms. Next slide, please, Christine. We are a 3rd generation, or 3rd generation here of my family. Next slide, please. Yeah, so a little bit of history. We've been around this site since 1944. Started at 150 hectares, mixed arable. Previously had a variety of enterprises, including cattle, sheep and turkeys. Next slide, please.
I think there might be a bit of a delay, Michael. Is there also someone typing? Sorry to cut in. Is there someone typing at your end? It's quite loud through ours. I don't know if it's on your end. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, of course. Sorry, that's all right. The farm today, it's a mixed arable farm with 630 hectares total, 560 hectares of arable, and laying hens and a composting business. Next slide, please. The farm is split into 3 blocks and they're about 10 miles apart. The soils, we're about 2/3 clay and the rest is a makeup of clay loams, sandy loams and loamy sand. Next slide, please. So the arable consists of a whole range of different crops. You'll see things of note on here. The winter wheat hectarage is up this year and it was down last year for obvious reasons. Oilseed rape, it says we had 54 hectares in 1920. We didn't, we drawed 110 hectares and every one of them failed. So heads to 0 this year. And then we have a mix of everything you can see there, but all arable based, all some to be fed to our chickens and some for selling. Minimum tillage basis with no fixed rotation. It's entirely to suit the weed pressures, and we're working towards a sort of more semi-controlled traffic system. Next slide, please. Then we have our chicken side of the business. We've got plenty around, which is very handy for producing manure, which you'll hopefully see in a second. Next slide, please. And then compost. We're incredibly fortunate in that we have our own composting business, which we've been running since 2003, and it's taking in 4,000 to 5,000 tonnes a year, which you can roughly half the output from that. So it produces about 2,500 tonnes of compost a year, and we keep all that for ourselves very handily. Slightly, yeah, to our benefit. Next slide, please. And then just a few more little bits that we've got around the farm, just as extra diversity, if you like. Next slide, please. So on to the soil management. Cultivation wise, we're on a minimum tillage basis. So that's that set of discs that you can see there, basically similar to a Vardestad carrier, 2 to 3 centimeters, and then we run a rubber roller behind it just to the compaction. It's just trying to get it just so that it's not too firm, but firm enough. The roller on the discs themselves doesn't do a good enough job on our heavier land. We mow plough every 5 years on a rotation-ish. There's some fields that get it more regularly, some that get it less. Subsoiling, we have been doing it on pre-oilseed rape drilling and pre-bean drilling, but with the loss of oilseed rape, that's obviously under review now. Where will it come in the rotation, and will it come in the rotation? Questions to be answered, because if we can get away without it, that's obviously quite a saving. And our current drill is a Amazon Kona tine drill, which is possible to use as a direct drill, but prefers a bit of tilth on top. It's not the best at direct drilling unless the conditions are particularly ideal for it. Organics wise, I've mentioned the chickens and the compost. It translates that we have an awful lot of organics to spread every year. 2,100 tonnes of layer manure and 2,500 tonnes of compost, and as you'll see in a minute, it's doing wonders for our soil. And the straw, because of what the organics is providing to us, we try and bale everything and get rid of it. Next slide, please. So soil testing, you'll see various different indices there. It's a mixture of our land. You've sort of got the top 3 which are lighter soils and the bottom 3 which are heavier soils. Indices are all over the shop. To try and give you and organic matter actually, which we can see on that one, is all very good. There's a few fields that are down, the note being site 2 on that one, home house, which was ploughed as an experiment, and it's a near identical field to the field above it, and you can see what that one ploughing, which is the first ploughing it's had for probably 15 years, has done to everything on that field. So that was a bit of a interesting and scary experiment for us. Apart from that, yeah, next slide please. So this, it's not for you to read all this, but what you should be seeing is that the indices for R, P and K are of particular interest. I've put at the bottom, this bottom table is what they should be, or that's what they're ideally at, and that's what ours are at. They're scary, and if you go to the next slide please, Christian. This is the heavier farm, so the indices here are really even worse. We've got some very high indices all round on this particular farm. So if we go to the next slide please, Christian. Just putting them next to each other, you've got a mixture of different, every field is different, so it's creating that bespoke and different plan for each field, and quite how we manage that. So next slide please. What you'll see here is what you've seen Colin put one of these up. This is a plan that we'll get from our agronomists, and this is showing what they're recommending for a crop of wheat in this particular field, and this is highlighting that we've got lockup in places, other bits that we need to put on, and then I put a few different bits that we might do to look after, or that we can do in between crops. So whether that's cultivations, whether that's spreading organics, lime, gypsum, we're sort of trying it all. As Colin was saying earlier, we have the magnesium and calcium ratios all wrong as well on our heaviest. So we've experimented with a bit of gypsum to try and see if we can help that ratio out and reduce some of the lockup. Yeah, we're still very much in learning phase on this, as I suspect many of us are. Next slide, please. So now we're on to the costs associated with managing the nutrients on our farm. The top one, that's if we're putting it on with a sprayer. Obviously, it's not going to do a lot for the soils, but we're thinking now how to combat our soil and to help the crop. So, yeah, you've got a cost of the nutrients, cost of the application time, possible extra pass maybe. You've got the cost of the testing, which is very cheap. It's £20 per sample if you sample it yourself. So very good value, I think, for what you get in return. The cost of the manures, obviously we're fairly unique in this, in that we have our own supply of compost and chicken manure. However, for other people, it's always possible to get these things for whatever arrangement suits your farm, but transport cost is usually the make or break factor in any of these. The cost of the spreading, it's quite hard to figure this out. Basically, it costs us about £70 an hour to run our muck spreader, with a loader and a man and diesel and everything. And that's one muck spreader, one man, one loader. And compost needs about 3 loads per hectare, so that's £70 a hectare. Chicken muck needs 1 load per hectare, which is £24 a hectare. Is there a hidden cost in doing that, in increased compaction? Going forward, very possibly. Finally, straw, because that's a benefit. Because we have the high indices, we're taking it off. That's £60 per hectare coming back in that we can then invest elsewhere. Again, another way of looking at it. And then I've just put a little table on the right-hand side. Our nitrogen isn't particularly high spend, and our trace elements are quite high spend, and it's just balancing all these different things to try and get the most return. And we're also using the trace elements to try and bring down the fungicide spend. Yeah, all a balancing act at the moment, so we're just trying to figure out where we should be with that. Next slide, please. So final slide. What we're changing to try and work on this. We've switched to a new agronomist, company called Edifos. Basically, whilst not completely independent, hopefully their agronomists understand a little bit more and link the soils to the micronutrients to the chemicals, which is often a disjointed process at the moment, with an agronomist specialising in a chemical or his chemicals from his chemical company. So this is just a trial. They seem to look good, and we signed up with them this autumn, so no idea how that's going to turn out, but promising. And the loss of oilseed rape, how is that going to affect our health, soil health? Scope for improvement. We need to learn more about how we can combat our nutrient lockup. How can we better use and manage the various data? We've started doing quite a lot of testing, and managing the data that comes in and making practical use of that at current is very difficult. So still working on ways of using that most efficiently and actually getting the money out of what you've spent. How can changing cultivation strategy aid soil health? We're on minimum tillage. We're certainly looking at direct drilling. That one is more of an ongoing development. Don't know quite where we're going to end up on that. I'd like to, Dad and I sometimes disagree about such things. And what the impact would be, is direct drilling the correct answer? Is going to a controlled traffic the correct answer? It has impacts on, as has been mentioned already today, I think that there are costs associated with putting muck on, in that you're going to have compaction if you're not spreading at the right times, as is getting straw off, which we do. So yeah, there's other things to think about. And finally, how best to measure the improvements in the soil. We can keep monitoring the organic matter. Ours are generally very good, but does that mean that they're perfect? No, it doesn't. So quite how we manage that going forwards, and how we look at the various indices and how we assess that we're doing well, is another point for us to look at. And that should be it. Thank you.
Are you there, Judith? You might be on mute currently.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I knew I'd do it. Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. That's great. You've posed a lot of questions there and set a challenge for everybody, I think. Your office sounds busy this morning. Anyway, I think at that point it's ready to move over to our final speaker, Gary from Wainfleet Monitor Farm. He's only with us, unfortunately, for the next half hour. We'd better make the most of him. He's got to be away by 12:30. So over to you, Gary. Thank you.
So I haven't got half an hour of talking. We don't worry, everyone. So hello, everybody. Welcome to Wainfleet Monitor Farm. So we're out near Skegness on the east coast of Lincolnshire. We're out on the marsh. It's flat here, sea level. We're farming. So we're on a high mag potash releasing clayey soil with no stone. It's not abrasive in any way. When it's wet, it's really wet, and when it's dry, it's hard as nails. And we've probably all got a bit of that somewhere along the line. And if we move on to our first slide, please. That's it. So this was AHDB did our soil health review back in September, I think it was. And these are this is just a brief overview of the results, and it's the first time we've ever had anything like this done. So before this, we didn't know our sort of clay content of the soil. We've been doing soil testing, obviously, for the pH, the pK and mag, but there's a lot of new things on here. So there are a few red squares there that we will work on. We're on a changing system, so we've been on a sort of plough-based system, and that is all on the change. So so we'll be able to monitor those organic matters, things like cation exchange capacity. That'll be interesting to see which way that goes. Earthworms, that's a good indicator. I love getting my spade out, get it in the soil, seeing some worms. I'd never open up soil and not see worms, so so that's really good, and I hope that will improve as we go. So that's good. So the only other thing to mention possibly is manure. So our cereal straw goes off the farm, and we're on a straw for muck deal, and then cattle farmyard manure comes back on, and that is spread in rotation. So whether that's helping those soil organic matters, I'm not sure. Be interesting to see where it goes in the next 3 to 4 years over the Monitor Farm programme. So on to the next slide, please. So the plough has now gone. It has been replaced with the weaving GD direct drill. I've been looking at soil, reading bits and pieces. What's going on, where do we want to go? Obviously, we all know Elms is going to come round. We've got a general idea of the direction of travel. There's a lot of detail to work out there. So there will be I call it a pain barrier to break through as we start direct drilling. It's not going to be rosy for a short while, a few years, but I'm looking forward to soils improving without sort of breaking up that natural soil structure from cultivation. So yeah, I'm using my BPS money. Well, we know it's here. Get through the sort of pain barrier of getting into direct drilling, just going cold turkey on it. So we're going to be direct drilling, cover cropping. Obviously, I've still got flat lift parked in the long grass. I'll use it if we need. It's nice to get a nice dry summer, see that ground crack open up, and hopefully that will be my subsoiling. There will be some sort of targeted drainage as well. We've sort of got a bit of a aging, flagging underground drainage system, so we'll certainly be needing to do bits and pieces, remedial work, keep putting in some new land drains on our worst bits, and sort of keep rotating that around the farm, which will definitely help. Okay, on to the next picture, please. So here we have, this is a lovely piece of wheat. This field was winter beans. It was flat lifted behind the combine and drilled in with a GD on the 21st of September. And it looks really well. Unfortunately, it's not mine. This is a contracting customer that I do the work for, and as you can see, drilling in September worked really well. Got this crop away nicely. And on the next picture is a field of wheat of ours, not looking so nice, and this was drilled in mid-October, and we're going to sort of wind the clock back on this field to see how we got through to this. This was taken a couple of days ago. As you can see where the tractor pulled the drill through the field. We've got the wheel marks there. It doesn't look pretty. It looked better at drilling, but it's obviously it stood a bit of water. As you actually walk across that field, it does walk better than it may look. Where you stick a spade in the ground, it is quite nice under there. It's just where we've got that little bit of surface damage from the tractor tyres. It's made a bit of a mess, but actually you stick a spade in and it's not as bad as it looks. So we'll be sort of taking that through to a crop, and I will also be trying to find a couple of hectares in there for a yen entry, which will be interesting. So next slide, please. I think we've got a picture of just sort of where I've stuck a spade in, open the soil up. You can see it's quite clayey. You can see around the outsides of the picture there, where the sort of clayey nature of the soil, it's sort of run together, causing that bit of ponding in the background of the picture. But open it up, there's worms, there's roots, and I'm quite happy with that. It's not the best, but it could be a lot worse, and I think hopefully going forward it can only improve. So before it was drilled, that field, the next slide please, we had a cover crop in there. That was it after the drilling. So it was oilseed rape before the wheat. Quite a lot of oilseed rape volunteers. I did also drill in there, bit of a cover crop, some radish, bit of linseed, a few other bits and pieces. I'm not big on spending too much. If I'm spending, yeah, just keep the spend down on the cover crops. If you get something in there, I'm not spending big bucks on cover crop seed. I'm just not doing it. So, and then the next slide, please. Just showing there the oilseed rape. There's a lot of top and not a lot of bottom down the bottom of the picture there. Might be good for sheep, but in my soil, I really need to learn more about the roots of the cover crops and learn more about cover crops. And yeah, it's all about what's going on under the surface and not just all that top on the top, because that is the top that made the drilling awkward and difficult. So next slide, please. Here we'll have a picture of some winter beans. This was direct drilled into the stubble. So yeah, used the GD. It was first week in October. So it was drilled into the stubble. I then went in with a Roundup and Pre-M propyzamide together and shut the door on it. So we get a bit of fungicide in the spring, and that'll be about it. Then the next slide, please, is where I've just sort of opened up that soil again, just to sort of show it's in pretty reasonable order. We've got roots growing through it, we've got worms, and it opens up nicely. So hopefully that will be a good entry into some winter wheat. And then just briefly, something else that's going on the farm. The next picture, I've shown you there the weaving GD. So my winter project has been a tine drill to complement the disc drill. The weaving wasn't the best when things got tricky and wet in the autumn, so we're having a go at a drill build. On the next picture, my final picture, we can see it from the other end, using some Metcalf points here. I'm hoping that I'll be able to drill my winter cereals in September. The GD is fantastic at not moving the soil, not encouraging that flush of black grass. Just attack the soil when it's dry. If we've still got, well, we will have winter beans to drill in October, and hopefully this will be the machine to do it. Obviously, a few new parts. Drill hopper will be coming off a drill that's already on the farm, and we'll see how that goes. So watch this space on that one. Okay, thank you very much. That's just a bit of a brief update of sort of what's going on with the soils. Just to say, it's everything on the farm has been drilled with a cash crop or cover crop with a GD. One field was cultivated, and that was it. So really just going cold turkey on the cultivations and drilling front, and hopefully it will work out for us. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Gary. It's a lovely way to finish an update on what's going on inside your machinery shed. Marvellous. Can we have all our panel back, please? We're ready to move into the questions at this point. We have some for the panel and some individual questions as well. I think I'll start for now with one or two panel questions, just in case Gary does have to go before we've got there. I said we wouldn't overrun, but we might do. We'll see. That thing we asked at the start. I must confess, we put the wording together in about a minute before it started, because it was kind of last minute thing. When we said independent rather than commercial, it's like whether you get your information from independent sources rather than, you know, machinery manufacturers stuff, and that instead of that. We might come back to that if we've got time. I don't know. Somebody wants to know what each of you means by the term min-till, those of you who've been using it. Where should we start? Should we do it alphabetical? Colin, did you use the term this morning?
Yeah, so I'm trying to disturb the soil as little as possible. Having said that, I'm using a low disturbance subsoiler followed by a drill, and that is all I'm doing. If what I'm trying to do is get away from the subsoiler as well, but I'm saying for those damaged soils, I haven't got to the point where I can get rid of the subsoiler totally yet, and therefore I've tried that. I've tried Gary's approach, cold turkey. The yields went down drastically. I'm trying to find a halfway house by using cover crops and cultivator at the moment, but the cultivator is basically a subsoiler if it's needed. The rest of it's just drilling and cover crops.
Thanks. Is the definition the same across the board? Rick, what would you say?
Yes, I'd say the same. We're trying to do as little as possible. Ideally, directly straight into stubbles without doing anything. But as a minimum, we'll just use a scratch with a Claydon Terrastar. So yeah, that's my definition of min-till.
Mike and James, I don't know whether you probably didn't talk about it. Am I right? Is there anyone anything to add on that? Mike, James, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, I won't be looking to min-till. I'll be looking to use the sort of the cover crops as an entry, sort of overwinter cover crops as an entry for a spring crop. The spring linseed, the spring beans is a good entry into the winter wheat without doing too much. The GD is fantastic at getting the seed under the ground and covering it up. There's no slotting issues or anything like that. So yeah, I won't be looking to min-till. It'll be just straight in. Yeah, although if I need to flat lift, I will, but I'm not sure as it does an awful lot of good sometimes. If you flat lift where you've had a puddle, the next year you still seem to have a puddle. So it can often be that you need to dig down a bit further and look at your drainage.
Okay,
Yeah,
Mike, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, it's just that we've still got our set of discs that we go to that 2 to 3 centimeters with. At the moment, the current practice is to do it twice a year for a chit everywhere. If it were up to me, we'd do none. If it were up to Dad, we'd do 3. I think going forward, it would take a change of drill for us to be able to go full no-till or full direct drilling. But very similar to as Gary's doing, we definitely need 2 drills. We'd need a tine and we'd need a disc drill. It just wouldn't work on our soils. Yeah, very much what Colin's doing, to be fair. He's got all 3 drills set up, and yeah, it sounds a good approach to do it.
Okay, thank you. Now, how do you all qualify the time element of sowing cover crops at a busy time of year? Should we start with Rick on this one?
As I said earlier, I don't have the staff capacity to do it while we're combining. So generally, as soon as we're finished and we're all in pretty good order, I will try and get them in then, effectively. So they sort of have to play second fiddle, unfortunately. But sometimes August can be quite it can be quite a wet month. So in an ideal world, it'd be nice to get them in as soon as possible. But as soon as I can, I'll get them in.
And Colin?
So basically, if I'm going to leave a soil bare for more than 6 weeks, I will, and I'm going in with a cultivator of any sort, we will put a cover crop in. I don't like to see bare soil over winter. It's part of the whole process, and therefore, if we can, we will sometimes follow the combine round. And for example, if we have to subsoil, we might as well subsoil and put the small seeds in with the applicator on the back of the machine.
And Gary?
Yeah, it's just cramming in as many hours as you can, combining in the afternoon, a bit of drilling in the morning, and just once you've got that drill across the field, you've got your cover crop in, you haven't then got to worry about your other cultivations and such. So I cram in the hours, and I'll know that I'll reap that reward back when it comes to sort of later into September, October, or even in the spring. Yeah, just sort of get on, get yourself set up. That's the way I take it. Yeah.
And Mike?
Yeah, we do a slightly different approach. We waiting for our straw to come off, so that can be anything from a couple of days to a month, depending on what the weather's like. And then the current practice is we'll try and get a couple of chits in before, and then we won't drill cover crops until probably late September, which means that there's very little there over winter. But we're not grazing ours at current, and that's what we're currently doing.
Okay, thanks. And what do you regard as big bucks on cover crops? Oh, golly, who should we start with? Do you want to start with you, Mike, on that one?
We're of the mind of everyone else that it will be as cheap as possible. So it will be home saved cereal of some kind, plus we've been sowing spring vetch, which comes to very little but dies off over winter. Under constant review, no idea what's best.
This current season, we did it very cheap. I just bought spring vetch, sowed that on its own, and that was in where there's hoping to be cereal volunteers, which it always is, and it's come up quite well like that. So spend the money on the vetch and let the cereals grow themselves.
Okay, thanks, Gary.
Yeah, I usually there's a few grass weeds, a few volunteers out the back of the combine to sort of settle the cereal element of it. I've looked at various options, bought, I mean, you can buy bags of seed at their sort of recommended rate can be £70 a hectare. So my call is there, look for something with a high rate of Phacelia or radish in, put that on at a much lower rate, maybe only 1/3 of a rate to keep the spend down, add in a bit of linseed or what else you might have on the farm really. But also just think something like mustard. Just get something in the ground, cheap and cheerful. Yeah, I'm not spending £70 a hectare on seed for a cover crop. I just can't bring myself to do it, I'm afraid.
Rick?
Yeah, the same as Gary. I think if you can home save as much as possible, then that's ideal. I think if I could be in the sort of £15 to £25 a hectare max, that's where I'd really want to be.
And Colin?
Okay, so we have spent a lot of money, in particular last year, on two fields we couldn't get on. We tried drilling one and we sank out of sight, and the other one, the drainage is damaged. So we did spend upwards on this particular one. So we drilled in April, May-ish, cusp of the two, and spent £45 a hectare on a big C4 generating plants, big mixture in there. And the way I take it on that is basically I could have spent £45 a hectare ploughing it and then spent another £30 a hectare cultivating it on top of that. I'm trying to get the cover crop to do a bit of cultivation job. That did a fantastic job and we kept it till August and then destroyed it in August. But traditionally, I'm the same as the others. If you just eat something like an oat vetch Phacelia mix in the overwintered stubbles, they don't cost nearly as much as that.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to a few questions on sewage sludge. We have one or two. Rick, you've been asked about this. You have been talking about applying it. I'm going to combine two questions here. How is sewage cake incorporated and when? And have you seen any negative effects?
So application will be either as soon as the combine's finished or when the spreading gang is coming round. So it could be 2nd, 3rd, 4th week of August or 1st week of September. So obviously the book says that it has to be incorporated with a disc-like implement. So we'll use our Claydon TerraStar to incorporate that into the surface. Because we've been direct drilling for quite a while, we've got quite a nice bit of shallow till. So that does generally, in our opinion, is generally adequate to incorporate sufficiently. Again, if conditions are a little bit on the sticky side, we'll try and hold off as much as possible until it's slightly dry. But it's a pretty tight window to try and get it spread and incorporated. And sorry, the second part of that question, sorry, Judith.
Have you seen any negative effects of adding sewage sludge? Heavy metals has been mentioned there.
Yeah, well, I think historically that's been quite a bit of a common theme. In the 90s, 80s, 90s, when they first started making it, there was a lot of issues with heavy metals. You weren't allowed to grow milling wheat after a sewage sludge application. They're now stripping those heavy metals out, and it's obviously got to be classified now, and it's very tight regulations on on applying sewage cake. So it's very safe product, and I'm very pleased with it. But the only side effects I would say is obviously 23 tons a hectare. Some of their breeder spreaders, I think they had 29 tons empty. So you're looking at 50 tons a hectare. And yes, they're on large flotation tyres, but to stop them rolling over, they're running about 70 psi. So it's not ideal. But at the end of the day, if you can get them there on farm early enough before we get significant rainfall. Last year they came in September after some heavy rain, and thankfully the subsurface was still firm. So we had some shallow wheelings which managed to pull out with a flat lift in places. But I'm finding as the soils are improving, I'm finding that less cultivations are better. Flat lift can often just lead to further subsurface issues. So we're trying to do as little as possible.
Thanks. And leading on from that, another question is starting off saying, where sewage has been applied, the phosphates have gone high. This can cause lockup of trace elements, for example, zinc, which may still appear high in soil analysis. Do you do foliar analysis to find out what is really happening to the crop?
We have been doing foliar analysis, but only from the point of view of NP and K. When I send off samples to Yara's labs up at Landcrop. So far, because we're only really on the second application of sludge around the farm. So this year we'll see some fields have had 2 applications. So it'll be interesting to see whether we've got some issues arising from that. So be mindful of. Thank you.
Does anyone use bought-in compost? And if so, is it full of plastic fragments?
Yeah.
And how do you deal with them if so? Colin, I'm going to start with you. You look as if...
Yeah, the first year we did it, absolutely fantastic, very mindful of the plastic elements, etc., etc. It's supposed to be PAS 100 certified, and therefore it's supposed to be free from plastics. The reality is it's somebody picking the plastics off at a conveyor belt as it's going along, and if it's a windy day, he picks them off and they blow back on further down the line. I was very annoyed this year with the amount of plastics that was in it. I have made a comment about it. The PAS 100 is supposed to be that it isn't. I'm using the compost to prime the soils. I don't want the plastic in there. But it's a bit like Rick was saying with sewage sludge. We sort of have to embrace some of these things. If we're going to utilize a renewable source, we're going to have to sort of embrace them and deal with them. So all I can do is make a comment. Hopefully next year it'll be better, and if it's not, find another supplier. I'm not in control of it, you see, and therefore I'm buying it in. Michael and Rick seem to be able to create their own.
Gary, have you any dealings with that at all?
No, I haven't. Don't use any compost. We've got the farmyard manure coming back on. Be looking to sort of growing the cover crops, getting that organic matter into the soil, using them. But yeah, no compost. And it is a concern, the traffic. I think if it's a sort of a wet autumn, and I can see that damage is going to be a problem from the manure spreaders, then they may sort of leave it till spring and try and get manure on into a growing crop in the spring. Yeah, so yeah, thank you.
Thanks. And going back to cover crops, are you thinking about mycorrhiza when picking cover crop species, or simply cost? Where should we start? Colin?
Yeah, so basically I am, with my cover crops, looking at soil structure. If, for example, those C4 generating plants I'm talking about that utilize the sunshine during the summer months, I'm looking to improve the soil structure through the use of roots. And hopefully what I'm working on is that will encourage the fact that you've got roots in the soil, will increase the mycorrhizal element, and therefore allow my soils to be stuck together. So I am sort of inadvertently focusing on that, but as I'm not a stickler too much on cost if the cover crops are doing the job for me, restructuring the soil.
Mike? James?
Give this one to Dad, I think.
We're not measuring mycorrhiza at all as of yet. We're just doing it to improve the soil, really, and hopefully the two come together. One will improve the other. Very difficult thing to measure and quantify.
Rick?
I think similar to what James just said. I think in the infancy, we're just trying to get as much root mass into the soil as possible, and again trying to convert out of season sunlight into carbon in the ground. And I think as we go on, I think we'll put in a refining exactly what we're trying to do, and looking at different cover crops to try and do that more efficiently. But I think from the outset, I just want to try and get into the habit of growing a cover, trying to refine how I destroy that, plant into it, etc. And then I think as we go forward, I can look at better species to do that.
And Gary?
Yeah, yeah, it is important, those mycorrhizal fungi, and it's just sort of trying to a good varied and wide rotation. And then when I do put a cover crop in, it's a multi-way species. I did mention there, just sort of using mustard, but yeah, just try and get other bits and pieces in there. Growing a bit of linseed, took a few handfuls of linseed in the mix, and just plenty of variety really, and not too many monocultures on the farm, which is the way forward really.
Gary, if you've got to go, then please feel free to slip off. We'd have some more questions. I'm going to overrun slightly, I think, because there are still some more interesting questions. If everyone else is okay. I've just gone off my screen again. Sorry. Let's have a look what's happened. There we go. There's another question for, I think it's for everybody. I don't quite, I hope this means something to you. Use SW7 when you could use GS4 and have benefit of N-fixing and deep-rooting chicory. Does that question make sense to you?
I think that's for me. I've got, so obviously on one of my slides, we've got 17 hectares of SW7, which is arable reversion. In that situation, we basically took some arable land off the floodplain and reverted it to grassland. We're not looking at bringing that back into the rotation. So that arable land will, that grassland will effectively remain in a stewardship scheme going forward. Where I'd like to, if I was to use that on our arable rotation, I would probably use something like maybe an AB15, or I think, yeah, it could be the SW4 potentially.
I think what I'd like to say with that, Rick, is that I think I forgot to mention 5.5% of my farm is in a stewardship scheme at the moment. I think with elms coming in, if you have a look at these different codings, all these numbers we're saying to you, these letters, and now do it now, because then you learn these things about the chicory and the other thing. See what fits for you. It's a good time to experiment with it now while we've got a bit of money in the bank, because in 7 years time we'll have nothing there and we need to learn about these things. So I think these codes and trying these different things, and just a forum like this where somebody can say, well, what about this? I think that's key to going forward, especially if elms is going to be the way forward as it's suggested, proposed.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Thanks. I do struggle with acronyms, as you can tell. Now, we've one for Colin here. You mentioned sheep coming back on the farm. How are you going to use them?
So the idea of the sheep is the permanent pasture I've got for the suckler cows could be there for the sheep to graze, and the sheep are. We were all talking about disturbing the soil less and using cover crops as an overwinter covers. The key thing is, if glyphosate goes, how are we going to destroy these cover crops? How are we going to get rid of them if glyphosate goes and we're trying to do less cultivations? The idea behind the plough is you can bully the soil into submission, get rid of these cover crops and create a nice soil structure going forward. If we don't want to do that, if that's not the right thing to do, then sheep are the keys to destroying cover crops, in my opinion. And therefore we again, because we've got the money there for the next few years, why don't we feel our way into that? I just want to say they're not going to be my sheep. I'll find somebody else that can do that for me. So,
Question that comes up often is, how are you going to find the sheep? I mean, have you already got somebody lined up, or is that something you've got to tackle? And if so, how will you go about it?
Luckily on my doorstep is a young lady who wants to be a shepherdess. That's her ultimate goal. At the moment, she works for the manufacturers of Nurofen. So she wants to get into shepherding. She has no, I think all four of us have allowed ourselves to become a generational thing in terms of agriculture, encouraging new entrants, encouraging people to come into the industry that wouldn't normally get a leg up, is what I would like part of my legacy to be. Is I encourage other people through apprentices or through shepherdesses or the such, they can come and if they can make a living out of that, and that's her long-term goal. Unfortunately, we've only got 25 sheep at the moment, but you've got to start somewhere.
Thank you. I think I'm going to draw it to a close at that, unless anyone's anything to add from the panel. No? Well, I think at this point we'll just slip in that little poll question that it was actually Gary's gone, but it was it did actually come from him initially. It was there was a second part to that to come back to at the end, and we'll do it now. Having listened to all that, are you likely to read more or investigate more into your soils now? Has it made any difference? If you'd just like to answer that poll question, yes or no? We'll tell Gary what came out from the outcome of that.
I'll give it a couple more seconds. We've had about 70% people vote. I'll show it now.
Whee!
Wow, yes, it has made a difference. That's really interesting. Thank you for that, for participating. And I think at that point then, it's down to me to thank our speakers very much for what they've done this morning, preparation beforehand and so on. So put a lot of time into that, I can tell, and to sit there imparting all that expert knowledge and so on. It's really quite something to have all that together. Very, very, very interesting stuff. Loads to come back to. So thank you all, Colin, Rick, Mike, James, and of course Gary in his absence. Thanks behind the scenes, Christian, and also Fiona for providing the much needed support for us all. Now to everybody else, at the end of the webinar, you're going to be taken to a feedback survey. Please, as I said earlier, if you wouldn't mind just filling that in, please, to give us some guidance on where to go next. If you haven't noticed it, I want to mention at this point, there are some publications listed at the side of your screen. You might have seen those before. If so, it's just a reminder, there is some very good stuff available on soils. It's a good place to start if you haven't already seen it. And a reminder as well that webinar has been recorded and it will be available on YouTube. If there are any questions about this or of any of our other knowledge exchange stuff in the region, do contact me on the email address on there. I want to just tell you about our upcoming webinars. The next 2 Mondays I'll deal with, but they are actually running through till, I think it's March the 8th. The next 2, they're at 7 o'clock in the evenings. We've got, it's another in the East Midlands. We've got, we're doing crop nutrition, we're including yen nutrition in there as well, but it's featuring Michael and James back again on Monday evening. So do join us then if you can. The following week, 15th of February, it's long-term proactive grain marketing. And once again, it's sort of East Midlands. It's a mixture, but Rick is taking part in that. So if you want to hear Rick again, please tune into that one too. Again, they're all recorded and you can catch them afterwards if you can't make it on the day. There are a couple more things I'd like to just mention. Webinars. Milling Wheat Conference this year is a series of 3 webinars over 3 days towards the end of February. They're all starting at 1 o'clock, running for an hour. So catch those if you're interested. They're looking to be, very, very interesting content as well, the way it's measured up. So that's good. And then on the same week, Friday the 26th, we've got the AHDB United Oilseeds Conference. Again, it's been converted to online, an hour and a half starting at 11 o'clock on that Friday morning. Please join us. All the links for signing up are on the website, so AHDB website that is, so do have a look. So once again, thank you to all our speakers, thank you to you for taking part, and join us please for the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.